Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Nothing But Nugs podcast, part of the Elevated Pulse Sports family of podcasts by the fans, for the fans, diehards only. And so now we're finally moving into our off-season content with the pod. The Nuggets season is officially over as of last week, obviously losing in Game 6 to the Minnesota Timberwolves. But just because the offseason is here does not mean we're taking an offseason. We'll be right here with you every Friday evening. So please stay tuned, and we hope you enjoy our discussions. But we're going to get kind of back to a more conversational format tonight. We got some fun stuff that we want to talk about, just recapping the 2025-2026 season. And so obviously Eric is back here with me again. He's my compadre now on this show. And so I've really appreciated that. Eric, how's it going?
It's going great. Excited to be here. Excited to talk some Nuggets. We had a little bit of Nuggets in the news today with the kind of end of season press conference. So I know there were some interesting things that could be taken out of the press conference. So hopefully we can dive into that. But yeah, definitely looking forward to just kind of rehashing the season as a whole. I know it didn't end the way we all wanted to, but I think definitely there's some positives, some things to grow on, and we have to look. Only one team finishes with a smile on their face at the end of the season, and all the other teams have to just turn the page. So unfortunately for us this year, we're turning the page.
Unfortunately so. But hey, hopefully we can get back to contention sometime in the next few years. Let's talk about the press conference today, by the way. So I was a bad Nuggets fan. I have not watched it yet. But you did watch it, and I did see some notable quotes from that press conference. What were your general takeaways from that press conference that was held today?
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, some general takeaways. I think that it does seem like the Nuggets front office is kind of lockstep, with what their goals are, with what they want to do. So that's always a positive, I think, when you see everybody kind of pulling the rope in the same direction, so to say. But I think there were some words that were said, especially from Josh Kroenke, around, maybe a little bit of complacency has come into the Nugget locker room. He talked a little bit about how once you've reached that mountaintop, how hard it is to stay at the top of the mountain. And, his family, they obviously own a number of different sports franchises and sports teams. And he's talked about how he's been lucky enough to taste success in a lot of different worlds, and repeating. And once you've reached that mountaintop, it's really hard to stay there and to get back to that place. So they talked a little bit about that. I thought that was kind of, really a cool thing to hear. And then, got to hear a little bit about David Adelman about kind of his coaching philosophy and what he thought almost kind of broke down in that Timberwolves series, which I thought was interesting. Really too much one-on-one, too many guys, just having to take it upon themselves to try and, whether it was Jamal Murray or Jokic, trying to just do too much. I think that was kind of the common thread. My takeaways anyways, is they've got to find ways for more guys to help, and more guys to make an impact. And then obviously they talked a lot about injuries. Injuries was, I think, a common factor, not just for the Nuggets, really across the entire NBA this season, but certainly injuries played a big role in the Nuggets. And they talked a lot about Aaron Gordon and kind of what they can do to help him in the future. Whether it's playing different minute rotations, or, what they can do from an offseason standpoint with strength and conditioning and training. So I think there's a lot that the front office is looking at right now. And, I think as Nuggets fans, we're all here to kind of strap in and see what road they're going to go down. I don't know that we're going to see all the guys back from this season as we move into next year, but maybe that's a good thing, because Josh Kroenke did talk about sometimes change is a good thing, and I think from this season standpoint, you don't want a repeat of this season where you get bounced in the first round again. So maybe they do need to have some change.
Yeah, well, changes are going to be coming. Probably not from the coaching staff side of things, but with the player situation, they just simply can't afford
No.
to not make changes in the literal sense of the term afford. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what financial decisions are made with roster construction this offseason. But I mean, as far as the complacency goes, yeah, I mean that's definitely something that you could have felt throughout the course of the postseason series for sure. Various regular season games, specifically almost the two road games they played in Golden State, you might say, where it just felt like they were just stuck going through the motions way too often. And it's just like you have to have that competitive drive. You have to have that competitive edge. And I think we talked about that on last week's podcast episode. That drive just didn't seem like it was there for a
Yeah.
lot of times and at certain points at least. And so yeah, we're talking about a 54 win team as if that's not an accomplishment. But I mean, at the end of the day, your goal was to win a championship and you failed very miserably in doing so. So that's completely understandable. But as far as the 2025-2026 season, I say we just dive right on into our season review because I'm sure we'll have a lot of fun conversations rehashing our perspectives at different points during the last season. So why don't we just start with last offseason, right? Last offseason, Nuggets went in having lost in a game 7 to the Oklahoma City Thunder, eventual NBA champions, obviously. And it felt like across the board, one of the largest issues was that the team needed to pick up some depth in the offseason. The depth that was picked up in the prior offseason with the signing of Russell Westbrook and Dario Saric were okay. Saric, not so much, but Westbrook provided a spark here and there. But overall, the sentiment was that we needed to pick up some depth, some quality depth to surround Nikola Jokic. And with the opportunity to retool the coaching staff and the front office, they had a good opportunity to do so. And so obviously the most notable moves of last offseason involved the signings of Tim Hardaway Jr., bringing Bruce Brown back, stealing Jonas Valanciunas away from some EuroLeague team, and obviously trading Michael Porter Jr. for Cam Johnson. So as far as those four moves were concerned, what were your thought processes at that point in time about those moves with the team's explicit goal of adding quality depth around Nikola Jokic?
Well, they definitely achieved the goal of adding the depth. I just don't know that it was necessarily all the right depth. So, we all knew the Nuggets just being kind of a smaller market team, having three max contracts on the team was not going to be something that they could sustain. So we all knew it was likely to be Michael Porter Jr. He was kind of the odd man out, even though I honestly felt he was injured in that OKC series where it went 7 games. But boy, if he didn't show you something playing with that shoulder injury, he gave you everything he could. So again, I know that's kind of that injury bug that bit the Nuggets, but it didn't surprise me that the offseason kind of started the way it did with hearing rumors and then ultimately turning into Michael Porter Jr. being dealt. Cam Johnson, I said it before, I wasn't in love with the trade when it first happened. He grew on me over the season. I think that's probably true with the majority of Nuggets fans. He didn't come out the gates hot, and then he had some injuries, kind of middle of the season. He dealt with a knee injury, so I think Cam struggled a little bit to find his footing, to just get comfortable with what his role was going to be in this offense. When you look at, I'll start at Jonas. I thought that was the move of the offseason, to be honest with you, to bring in a big that can play those minutes when Jokic sat. That really you weren't going to see the type of drop off that we had seen in years past. I mean, and I thought Jonas did a really good job in the regular season when he had the minutes when he came in. He's a big physical guy and kind of is able to sustain with that bench. Tim Hardaway Jr., I think he probably became, as the season progressed, the best of the free agent pickups, at least, from a scoring standpoint. The guy's a microwave. He can turn it on at any game. And then Bruce Brown. We all knew what we were going to get with Bruce. He'd been here before. The thing with Bruce is he absolutely loves being a Denver Nugget. And it's hard to say goodbye to those guys when you have them that love being part of an organization. And it's really a bummer that he left in the first place after the championship. I get it. I never fault anybody for going and getting their money. But man, if who knows what could have happened if we would have had, 3 additional years of younger Bruce Brown. So I don't know. I thought overall, the offseason was pretty good. The depth that they tried to build, I think they had the right mindset. I think, it's just sometimes things don't shake out the way everybody thinks they will. And I think with Cam, it maybe took a little bit longer than they had hoped for him to kind of gain his footing. But I think by the end of the year, they couldn't have been happier with who they had in Cam Johnson.
Yeah, fair enough. All good points. I think that as far as those 4 guys are concerned, during the offseason, I was super excited about the Cameron Johnson trade. I thought that Michael Porter Jr. had really evolved into a really nice basketball player for this team in really every aspect imaginable. Obviously a championship winner, obviously a guy who for his size is an incredible shooter and an incredible mismatch on most evenings. But I couldn't justify as a fan supporting keeping him on board for $38 million a year to be a 4th option on a healthy Denver Nuggets team. I couldn't do it. And especially since the depth was going to be much harder to acquire in the offseason with all the rule changes that had been made to restrict the construction of these super teams that we saw maybe like 10 or so years ago. It was just going to be inevitable that they weren't going to move off of Jamal or Nikola. They weren't going to move off of Aaron Gordon. Okay, they needed his defense. And so Michael Porter Jr. really became the odd guy out. And so to get a guy like Cameron Johnson, who on paper last offseason looked like a very comparable player to Michael Porter Jr. in terms of scoring output, 3-point shooting, with better defense, all things considered, at a price tag $16 million cheaper, I was like, okay, I'm all for that move. That's a solid move that upgrades the team and a high IQ basketball player to add on. And so I really was a fan of that Cameron Johnson move. With that $16 million that they saved, they were then able to go out and get Jonas Valanciunas as well, which was an absolutely incredible thing for them to be able to do. They were also able to move off of Dario Saric, which is an underrated move that they made last offseason too, to clear up like $8 or $9 million of cap space, I think it was. So, I mean, the offseason really started clicking at that point. We were like, okay, we got the money freed up. We got our backup center with Valanciunas, a solid veteran backup big, playoff experience, a guy who can relieve Nikola Jokic for like 10 or so minutes in a playoff game. I was all for it. So that was a great first move with that additional cap space that was freed up in the Michael Porter Jr. trade. Then they went out and they got Tim Hardaway Jr. and Bruce Brown on veteran minimum contracts. And so I was like, wow, the front office is absolutely cooking this offseason. They're doing a phenomenal job at putting not just veterans and guys who have experience in the playoffs around Nikola Jokic, but guys who are coming here not necessarily for money reasons, coming here because they want to play here. And so it was a phenomenal offseason in my estimation from that perspective. Is there really anything I was concerned about at that point in time? Not really. I mean, Bruce Brown had accumulated some injuries over his few seasons away from the Nuggets, and you might have figured that would have been relatively impactful. Bringing Bruce Brown back now was not necessarily going to be a perfect reunion for that reason. He was not going to be as bouncy or athletic. The shooting hadn't been as great either in recent years. But like you kind of said, he was a guy who wanted to play here, and so it was great to have that kind of guy come back to this team. So those were my thoughts on the offseason. Then we move into the regular season, right? We'll break it out into 3 segments. Let's talk about October through December first, the first few months of the season. Nuggets ended December with a 23-10 record. Okay, top 4 in the Western Conference, even though some of those injuries had started to set in, especially in November and December, they were still holding together just fine. And so, what were kind of some of your thoughts watching the team during that initial first few weeks of the season? Now you're getting to see the guys play together. You're just starting to see the chemistry being built. You're starting to see Tim Hardaway play really well as an outlier. I don't think we expected him to play that well in the role that he would have for this team. What were kind of your thoughts about the October through December part of the Nuggets season?
Yeah, look, they played really well in spurts. I thought that for the most part, they lived up to that what was it, 23-10 record by the end of December. The breakdown, though, when you kind of break it down by month, so 3-2 in October, and we all remember game one. We had a joke in my family, a running joke, that Aaron Gordon was leading the league in scoring, averaging 50 points a game after one game. So everything looked great, right? Except for the record. They lost that first game. So and then you move into October. I think they were 11-3 in October, and then 9-5, or sorry, in November, and then 9-5 in December. It just felt like there was something missing. There was something off. They lost more games at home than I think than certainly Nuggets teams in the past, but mostly it didn't live up to the fans' expectations. I think it still kind of felt like, even though we had these new pieces, everything kind of was still really heavily reliant on Jokic and Jamal, which, look, I get it. They're the superstars. They're the guys who you're going to turn to, in a close fourth quarter game. But I think, at least just from my perspective, it felt like it was still a little bit too much, dependent on Jokic. We still had, I think maybe Alderman didn't fully trust the rotations yet. He was kind of tinkering. We hadn't really seen Peyton Watson kind of jump into his, Peyton Watson mode quite yet. That happened a little bit later in the season. And then you had Christian Brown essentially go down with, again, kind of an inside joke, but what had to be the worst ankle sprain in the history of ankle sprains. I mean, it clearly was not good. But even though the record looked good on paper, you could start to see that there were some cracks. And look, I think it's better to have a good record and have some of those cracks, but still have time to kind of smooth those things out, than the opposite, for sure. But I think that the writing was on the wall of, hey, and maybe it's team chemistry. Team chemistry is something that I think goes a long way in the end. And having a bunch of new pieces, sometimes that team chemistry takes a little bit of time to kind of work itself out. And I think, those first 3 months of the season, I think that's exactly what the Nuggets were doing. They were kind of, Cam Johnson was learning his role, Christian Brown dealing with that injury, kind of Jokic and Jamal doing what they do. And Jamal had a sensational season. I don't want to take anything away from him. Same with Jokic. Those two guys deserve all the accolades. They deserve everything that they get. But on the flip side to that is, when they don't show up, do the other guys on the team show up? So I think that's kind of where they need to find a little bit more of that balance. And during those first 3 months, sometimes they struggled to find that balance.
Yeah. And I mean, we mentioned this. Maybe you mentioned this earlier on this episode. You mentioned it before we hopped on, but Kroenke, I think it was, mentioned at his press conference today that the team might consider running it back to the best of their ability next season. Obviously, some people are not going to like that. Obviously, I tend to fall into that category. But if you think back to when this team was healthy for the first 12 games of the regular season, they were, like I said, they were 10-2. They were a top 5 offensive and defensive team at that point in the season, both. And that's with everyone healthy. That's with everyone clicking, and not even fully clicking in the sense that they're playing well despite not really playing up to maximum potential. Cam Johnson obviously immediately comes to mind. And so it almost reminds me of the 2021-2022 season. I think it was that one. There was one postseason in this decade where the Nuggets just were completely ravaged with injuries, and they made the postseason. They were early exits. I think they lost to Golden State in the first round. And you're like, okay, this Nuggets team is just not healthy. They need to get a few new pieces, obviously, but they need to get healthy first and foremost and get through the regular season, get to the postseason with the full team having played enough games to build that chemistry so that they can truly compete for a championship. And lo and behold, they did that in 2023. They won. Kind of felt like this season, in some sense, had a little bit of shades of both of those seasons, right? Because you saw the championship potential that the Nuggets displayed the first few games of this season when they were healthy. Then you saw the injuries happen, and they never really got the opportunity to build that chemistry like the 2023 team did. That team also played well, but they also stayed healthy. And so in some sense, you can understand why Kroenke is like, we'll try to run it back. We might consider running it back. That's an option that's on the table, because the team, when they were healthy and not playing at peak chemistry levels, was a top 5 offensive and defensive team. And so that was a very interesting thing that I noted from the first few months of the season. Then obviously the injuries happened, but they continued to weather them pretty well. You did mention that there was a streak there where I think they lost 4 in a row at home, including to some teams that were just not very good. I think they lost to the Kings and the Mavericks at home. Yep. Can't do that. So it's like there were definitely things that needed to be worked out. They were a great road team in those months. Phenomenal. Maybe you could attribute some of that to a lot of the new guys in the rotation, 4 new guys in the rotation who hadn't fully adjusted to the altitude yet. Whatever you might want to blame that relatively poor home performance on, it's understandable. But yeah, it was just a strange first few months. The fact that they started off so hot, and then the fact that they ended with a top 4 record in the conference, all despite really not playing with maximum chemistry. And then by the end of the year, losing Cameron Johnson, Aaron Gordon, and Christian Brown at the same time. And then Nikola Jokic shortly after. It was just a weird conglomerate of events. But then we move into January and February, right? So now the team is fully into one of the worst injury situations that this team has seen in its entire franchise's history. Okay. What were your thoughts in January, where the team had no Nikola, they had no Cam Johnson, they had no Aaron Gordon, they had no Christian Brown, they had no Jonas Valanciunas for a little bit of time too? What were your thoughts? What was going through your head at that point in time?
Well, I think a lot of Nuggets fans were probably going through the same thing. You know, they were thinking, how are we going to do it? How are we going to maintain kind of this championship caliber stretch? You know, championship windows aren't open forever. And right now, you know, I don't know that the Nuggets is closed, but certainly when we were at the beginning of the season, we thought, hey, that window is open. We have an opportunity. We're a good enough team. You know, as you just said, you know, for those first 12 games of the season, they were dynamite. So I think a lot of fans kind of, you know, took it a little bit kind of like, hey, who do we turn to? Who's gonna be the guy that steps up? And Peyton Watson was the guy that burst onto the scene. You know, I think he was kind of given a little bit more responsibility, and you know, I'm speaking from a fan's perspective. It's kind of what I hoped Christian Brown would do, right? It's kind of what I hoped Christian Brown would do at the start of the year, is kind of turn into that guy that we could like lean on a little bit more for some scoring punch. Well, that didn't happen, but Peyton Watson sure provided that scoring punch. I mean, he came in, I think, you know, he averaged, it was about 16 points a game or so coming off the bench, and then he turned it into kind of a starting role. And then the other piece, look, I get it. He was a two-way player, but you got to tip your cap to Spencer Jones. The guy was relatively unknown. He came in, and look, his three-point shot does not look pretty. It's kind of gross to watch, to be honest with you, but it goes in. So I don't care what your shot looks like if it goes in, right? So, you know, those were kind of the guys that I saw stepping up. And look, you know, Valanciunas, he played his role when he was in there. I know he did miss a couple of games. Tim Hardaway, though, he played some big minutes. You know, Jamal ultimately, I think, was the guy who, though, that they really leaned on. He really put the team on his back, and he kind of carried them. And what sucks is we say this kind of year after year after year with Jamal. Jamal's clearly one of those guys who, like, that fire inside of him, it's almost second to none. He's got just such a competitive spirit that it almost hurts him in a sense, because the guy's going to go out there and give you 40 minutes a game if he has to. He's going to put up, he's going to score 30 points a night if he has to. He's going to do everything that he has to. But that takes a toll on you. It puts a wear and tear on your body. And then when you get to a playoff matchup like we did with, Minnesota, where they have really good one-on-one defenders, at that point in time, his body's tired. He's kind of broken down. So I think as the Nuggets kind of move forward, that's one of the things that they really have to figure out is, how do we maintain that bench ability, make sure that when Jokic and Jamal don't come off the court, we're still able to maintain and hopefully pull away like you kind of see OKC do, especially against the Lakers last night. That was kind of crazy when their SGA was on the bench, and when he left the court, they were up 2, and over the next 5 minutes, next thing you know, they're up 13. That's the kind of bench push we need. That's what we need to be able to find to develop. I don't know how it gets done, but those are the things that I think really separate a contender from a pretender. And unfortunately, I think the Nuggets were kind of proven to be pretenders this year. I know injuries play a part in that, but ultimately, I think the way that 6-game series ended up in Minnesota, you can't say anything otherwise. They weren't championship caliber.
No, they were not. But if you'd watched January, you might have come to a different conclusion.
Absolutely. That's why they play the full schedule.
That's why they play the full schedule. Because let me tell you, January absolutely reaffirmed for me that this was going to be a team that could win the championships this year if they stayed healthy. They had 5 rotational pieces missing, roughly 5. Maybe it was even 6 at some point. You had Jalen Pickett getting regular minutes. You had Julian Strawther getting regular minutes. Deron Holmes had relatively regular minutes for a few weeks. Zeke Naji got regular minutes. Like, the back end of this team's bench was getting regular minutes for several weeks, and the team finished January 9-6.
Yep.
Okay, that is incredible, or at least finished January in the sense that Nikola Jokic came back at the back end of January. Without Nikola Jokic, they were 9-6 in January. That's insane. Did not expect that at all. Did not expect Jalen Pickett to have 29 points in a 1-point win in Philadelphia. Okay, Philadelphia upset Boston in the first round. So, I mean, looking back at that, it's kind of like, wow, we didn't know that the Nuggets' homegrown depth was actually as capable as it was. So you saw that with Pickett. You saw that with Strawther. Deron Holmes, you saw for the first time, looks like he needed a little bit more development, needed to get in the weight room a little bit. He was kind of strangely playing this. It was kind of strange. On my old show, Hoops and Homers, I talked about this at that point in time, but it was weird. Holmes and Strawther were kind of playing like reverse type of roles, because Strawther is a guard who was taking like 50% of his shots within the paint, and Deron Holmes is a big who was taking more than 50% of his shots from the 3-point line. So it was kind of strange, but ultimately the guys were getting it done. And then lo and behold, the largest depth revelation that was completely unexpected during that period, like you said, was Peyton Watson. Okay. Now it's unfortunate that Christian Brown got his extension, I think, roughly a week before he got hurt, which was really unfortunate. Bad bad time for that to happen because Peyton Watson, if you had even just waited till the offseason, right, to give Christian Brown his extension, maybe you thought he would have, I get the reasoning, right? You thought he would have performed well this season and then you would have had to pay him probably a little bit more. But had you just waited for the offseason and you had seen Peyton Watson turn into the second best player on this team for a whole month, you would have thought twice. My goodness, he on both ends of the court, he was just absolutely phenomenal. He and Jamal carried January, and it was absolutely insane to see. So the Nuggets' depth was very surprisingly good in the month of January. Then guys started coming back, and you had the whole now we have to rebuild this chemistry again type of ordeal in February. February was not so good. Okay, February saw some close losses to Detroit, for instance. Oklahoma City was a relatively close loss. You got blown out by New York in March, I guess. But you had a close double overtime loss to New York in February. So it was a lot of close losses, close loss to Cleveland, close loss to LA. It was just that period of time was kind of expected, right? Because now you're getting everybody back. You're trying to build the chemistry that you should have been building for the last 2 months now with 2 months until the playoffs. And so February kind of was a little bit of a lull, but it was an understandable lull, and we expected them to come out of it. And so I didn't really think much about it, even though the Nuggets, I think, slipped almost to sixth, if not to sixth place in the standings at the end of February, if I'm not mistaken, for a little bit of time. But then March rolled around. So now we get to March and April. And the lulls of February got completely turned on its head. There's a reason why there's a roller coaster on the thumbnail of this episode if you're watching on YouTube. This was just the whole season. The whole season was an incredibly up and down roller coaster. And so March, not least, was an affirmation of that. What did you think about how the Nuggets just completely seems to turn it around in March now that pretty much everyone was healthy at that point?
I mean, that's what winning teams do. They do. Look, the NBA season is long. It's tiresome. You hear guys, retired guys talking about how once you hit that kind of that 50, 60, 70 game mark, it's almost just repeat, rinse and repeat. You go through the same thing. It's just in a different city every other night. So that gets tough. But when you have a team who has been there, done that, and it gets to be time where, look, I think you're right, they did hit that sixth seed, and I think that was almost kind of an eye opener. They said, look, hey, guys, we are not the sixth best team in the West. We have to start playing better, and I think some guys started to get, you started to see a little bit of leadership come out from the Jamals, and from obviously Jokic is kind of a leader on the court, but I'm talking more either off the court or in the huddles, on during timeouts and things like that. You never used to see, Peyton Watson or Christian Brown kind of taking the team and saying, hey, like, they're drawing up plays and they're almost kind of coaching to a certain degree. I think, though, there was some accountability. Probably, people, they had difficult conversations in that locker room, and they said, look, this is not who we are going to be. We are not going to be a play-in team. We are going to be a top of the conference type of team. And they went on their run. They had, I think 11-5 was their record in March, and then 6-0 in April. I think they kind of wrapped up the season, winning 11 out of 12. But the one loss that stuck out to me, and it was almost kind of a precursor, it was in March, and it was a 117-108 loss on the road to Minnesota. And I think that almost kind of, I don't want to say it gave Minnesota kind of an idea in their head of, hey, if things shake out and we get the Nuggets, that's kind of the matchup we want. And I know it's wishful thinking. You got to be careful what you wish for when you're playing against professionals, but that, I think, was kind of one of those games that almost said to Minnesota, hey, this is the matchup we want. And I think Denver really kind of played their way into that matchup. We all know in the last game of the season against San Antonio, look, you never want to play to lose. That's my opinion. You go out there, you play the games to win the games. But man, if they could have, if that game goes a little bit differently and they don't win game 82 on the road in San Antonio, and things shake out a little bit differently in the playoffs, and they get Houston in the first round instead of Minnesota, who knows what conversations we're having today. But all that's hindsight, all of it. It's easy to live life in reverse and make good decisions when you know what the outcome is going to be. But look, overall, I thought it's a successful season. You had essentially a rookie head coach. You finished over 50 in the win column. You would like to see a little bit more, obviously, from come out of the playoffs, but for those last couple of months, I think we were all back on to, hey, this is the Nuggets team. This is who we thought we were going to see all season. Let's go. We're ready for the playoffs. Unfortunately, in that kind of last couple of weeks, we still were dealing with injuries, and they reared their ugly head again with Peyton Watson, kind of tearing his hamstring, or I guess it's a grade 2 hamstring strain, which if we know anything about hamstring strains, that's a tear. So, you can't fault him. I mean, look, Luka Doncic with the Lakers, same injury. He's not back playing. Same kind of timeline. It's almost down to the day when they got hurt on almost the same night. I think it was 2 nights apart, but that's that. It's unfortunately, it just is what it is. And what ultimately I think ruined the end to what could have been a really special season.
Yeah, for sure. Now it's funny you bring up that Minnesota game, because in a month where the Nuggets went 17-5, that was their first game of the month of March. They did lose that game, obviously. It was the first time all season they had lost to Minnesota, funny enough, which is not something we thought we'd be saying at that point in the season. But even though the Nuggets were missing Aaron Gordon, Peyton Watson, and Spencer Jones in that game, that loss was kind of concerning, just a little bit. Not that you necessarily thought that the Nuggets would get matched up with Minnesota at that point in time in the first round, but they had Ayo Dosunmu at that point in time. They had made some trades to get their team in a better position to compete come playoff time. But I mean, other than that being known, I guess, from our perspective, as the Cam Johnson cardio game, ironically enough, where he played 23 minutes and he had 0 points. And then in game 6 of the playoff series was like one of the only guys who showed up in that game. Other than that, that game kind of set off warning bells just a little bit, but you didn't think too much about it. If you're a Nuggets fan, you're just a little bit frustrated, probably. Then the Nuggets go on to play roughly 500 basketball over the next few games. That's where you got the close loss to Oklahoma City. That's where you get the blowout loss to the New York Knicks at home, and you made 8 threes in that game. But at the same time, you beat San Antonio at San Antonio. You beat Houston at home. You destroyed Houston at home. But then a few weeks later, you went on to lose at Memphis, right? And so it was a very confusing time in that first few games of March. And then, obviously, they rip off the 12-game winning streak to end the regular season. And so even though Peyton Watson got hurt again during the month of March, you kind of had hope that the Nuggets would be able to figure it out. That was really the hope you needed to have. It was going to be clear that this team was going to be close to healthy, but not going to be healthy enough going into the postseason, even though Coach Alleman did want everyone to be healthy by about 20 games before the postseason. That never really came to fruition. So that was unfortunate, but the hope was that you had seen enough with the Nuggets weathering the month or so of missing critical role players in January. The fact that they had gotten through February, even though it was not a great month with guys coming back. And then in March, you were kind of on and off. The end of the month, you were like, all right, this team can still compete. This is still a championship contending team, even though they're not fully healthy. And we believe that they have the depth to get through the first round and the second round. Theoretically, I really didn't have much of an issue with them getting through San Antonio had they gotten there relatively healthy, regardless of who they played in the first round. So then it would have just come down to that championship series in the West against Oklahoma City for me. But you had a lot of very, very, very high hopes for this team after the month of March. And I mean, things kind of shook out in an interesting way the final few games of the season. And at that point, I guess at this point, we'll just transition right on into it. That postseason series, we'll just give a brief recap because we did our thorough walkthrough of it last week. But it's Sunday evening. You find out the Nuggets are going to be playing Minnesota in the first round. And they beat Oklahoma City, or was it San Antonio? It was San Antonio. They beat San Antonio. And now you're like, we're going to play the Minnesota Timberwolves in the first round of the playoffs again. Okay. I've been pretty clear the last few weeks about my prediction at that point. I was not happy at all with the Nuggets facing Minnesota, although I thought that they could beat them in 7 games. What were your thoughts before the playoff series on the Nuggets matchup with Minnesota? And then how was that verified by how the series went?
It's easy to look back now and say, yeah, I didn't like the matchup. But honestly, I haven't liked the matchup for a couple of years with Jaden McDaniels. I just he is length. He's got length. He's very physical. He plays aggressive defense, and he picks Murray up and makes him go when he brings the ball up, he makes him go the whole time with a guy essentially in his jersey. That is it leads to things like unforced errors, to turnovers, to difficult shot making. We all know Jamal can make difficult shots, but you hate to see it when they're forced into those difficult shots. You'd rather see them, missing wide open shots than missing contested shots. But I still thought that the Nuggets had enough to, especially when the injuries happened to Minnesota. I thought that that should have been the Nuggets series, to be quite honest. But you get special guys doing special things in the NBA. Look, every single player, it does not matter if you're talking about a starter or the 8th guy on the bench. Everybody in the NBA is in the NBA for a reason. When you think about it, they were probably the best player that ever played at their high school. They were probably a star on their college team. And when you get to the NBA and you kind of put them into that spotlight, some guys rise to the occasion and other guys kind of shrink in that spotlight. Well, I think we can say with confidence, Ayo Dosunmu, he rose to the occasion. And then when unfortunately for him, when he went down, then they had Terrence Shannon Jr. come in and he rose to the occasion. So hats off to Minnesota. They played a great series. I don't feel like they're the better team necessarily, especially with all the injuries, but they played harder. And the Nuggets just didn't have that chemistry that they had on that Timberwolves side of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, there's just not much else to say about that. I did not expect Nikola Jokic to get clamped up in this series by Rudy Gobert the way he did. I did not expect McDaniels to be Jamal Murray's primary defender in this series the way he was. I did not expect Christian Braun to really not get as many looks as he really should have gotten with that whole situation, right? You would figure with all the attention that was being devoted to Jamal and Nikola that Christian would get some more looks. He didn't have a double-digit game in the series, I don't think. Did he? Maybe he had one.
I think he had one. But, you heard some interesting comments from Christian this week where he took a lot of the blame. He shouldered a lot of it. And look, maybe that's growth. Maybe that's, him kind of stepping into a leadership role, which I think is a good thing. Can't hurt. But, he flat out said, I've got to be better. I'm a leader on this team. I think he said he's the leader. I think maybe he meant he's a leader on the team. But, if that's how he wants to see himself, great, because we need more guys like that. We need more guys who are willing to take on a leadership role and kind of try to relieve some of that pressure so it doesn't have to be Jamal. It doesn't have to be Joker every single night.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at some point, your leadership is your ability to lead is also based on your performance. And so it's unfortunate that while he has that great leadership perspective, he just didn't get either the opportunity or play well enough with the opportunities he got during that series to really leave at least many Nuggets fans confident that that is a good situation for him to be in. Uh,
100%.
I know.
100%.
But I mean, again, that probably comes back a lot to coaching and schemes, how you notice things during the course of the game and how you made adjustments if you're Coach Adelman. And so I can't blame Christian entirely for his poor performance. But at the end of the day, you're starting a contract where you're making $25 million a year. Better playoff performances are expected for sure in the future. And so it was just unfortunate that that's the way that went for him. But I mean, looking across the board, it was unfortunate Aaron Gordon got hurt. At that point, it did kind of feel like a momentum shift. Even though Anthony Edwards was not 100%, it did feel like, and again, by game 5, the Nuggets were missing Gordon and Peyton Watson. The Timberwolves were missing Edwards and DiVincenzo. Even though they're missing an all-star in Minnesota, at least, it felt like the Nuggets missing Gordon and Watson was a much more impactful duo that it swung the series significantly more than the Timberwolves missing the other two guys. But at the end of the day, the Nuggets just got out physical. They got out efforted. They did not really seem like they were in for these grind out type of games. And they just got worn down. I mean, they didn't score 100 points in any of the games they played in Minnesota. And that says just about all it needs to say about how that series went. But I mean, any other thoughts about how the overall season, as we kind of conclude this episode, any other just broad takeaways about this overall season and maybe some things that you're looking for as we start moving into the off season?
I think, a big question mark looms over the Nuggets. What's going to happen in this offseason? Josh Kroenke talked a little bit about it today. Do we run it back? I think you touched on it a little bit. I don't think that they're going to be able to run it back just from a financial standpoint exactly the way that it was. There's going to have to be some changes. We don't. The Kroenkes have been very clear with everybody from talking to fans to when they address the team. They're not going to be a team that puts themselves into that second apron, which I wish we had a little bit more, time to talk about caps and things like that, and how, going into that second apron really restricts what you can do as a team, as far as player movement goes. But that's maybe for another episode. But ultimately, look, I think there's probably going to be a change somewhere along the line, whether that's an Aaron Gordon moving, whether that's a Christian Brown moving. I don't think they're probably going to move away from Jamal Murray, because that Murray Jokic game, even though it kind of got shut down a little bit in that series with the Timberwolves, that's still a top duo in the NBA. There's no question about it. So to break that up, I don't think that's the appropriate way to go. That's not the right path to go down. But I do think that there's going to be moves. I think that there's going to be changes because, as I said earlier, you don't have championship windows that stay open forever. And even when they're cracked open, you got to take advantage of it and try to get everything you can out of it. They could be a move or two away from being right back, in contending, in a Western Conference Finals. So I don't, I'm not going to get my crystal ball out yet and say who's going to move or what it's going to look like. I do know it's going to be tough for them because that Christian Brown contract is, you're talking $25 million a year for the next 5 years. I think it kind of is. I think it starts out at 21 and kind of gradually increases. But needless to say, in the grand scheme of things, it's roughly breaks out to $25 million a year. Who's going to want to take on that contract and give back somebody who can, benefit the Nuggets in an impactful way? I know there's different names being thrown out there, and we could talk about some of those different names, but I think some of them are pie in the sky, to be honest with you. Yeah, it'd be great to pair up, a Jaylen Brown or a KD, those types of guys. But I don't know if that's realistic. I mean, you're talking about guys that make over 50 million a year, and we just had to move off of having 3 big time contracts with Joker, Jamal, and Michael Porter Jr. Well, now a year later, we're just going to turn around and take on another ginormous contract. I don't know if that's the path that they want to go down. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm not going to be surprised if they do try to run it back as close to as they can to what they had this year, with maybe some smaller changes, some more role player type of guys.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring up KD because there's a comment that got dropped about 15 minutes ago. Any thoughts on the Nuggets possibly trading for KD this offseason? Says Just Olympian. Yeah, look, so this is really going to come down to what the front office sees the Nikola Jokic prime looking like. Do they want to completely retool this team and give him something he's never truly had, which is a successful all-star teammate to try and collaborate with to win a championship? Or do they kind of just want to stick with what they've known has worked for the last 8 or so years and just try to build around that, kind of like you said, with some of those smaller pieces, kind of like they did in 2023? It'll be interesting to see what approach they go with this offseason. Would I personally be upset with a Kevin Durant move? I mean, obviously, like you said, the money situation is kind of interesting, and KD is almost in his 40s now. But I mean, if the Nuggets want to explore that route, I wouldn't necessarily fault them for doing so. I mean, at this point, you've seen that this team is not currently championship capable. You've got to do what you can to put established guys who have succeeded around Nikola Jokic. Maybe that doesn't look like going out and getting a future Hall of Famer like a Kevin Durant or maybe like a LeBron James. I've heard people kind of throw his name into some conversations before. Maybe it looks like something smaller and you go try to find a KCP type of comparable guy this offseason via trade or in free agency and make it work that way. But that does need to happen. The Nuggets do need to go out and they do need to get solid guys who can shoot the ball effectively and play okay enough defense around Nikola Jokic to the point where you can truly say that Nikola is not at fault for not bringing his team success, right? The last few seasons, at least this last season, the injuries definitely got in the way of him being able to fully do that. The team just didn't have enough chemistry for him to be able to effectively be the center of this team when it mattered most. And I mean, the last few seasons, like even during the course of his entire career, you've never really had a situation where he's had that established all-star type of secondary teammate to just go out and win a championship with. There was no Steph and KD combination or LeBron and Kyrie combination or LeBron and AD combination for Nikola Jokic to truly go out and win a championship. And so it'll be interesting to see what approach they take this offseason. But as far as KD, I don't think it's likely to happen. That would be absolutely massive from a breaking news perspective if the Nuggets found a way to make that work. But yeah, they'll probably try to piece it together, make some smaller moves that can work around the team's current financial situation. But we'll see how it all plays out. This front office took some relatively large swings last offseason. We'll see what their second offseason at the helm has in store for us in the next few weeks as the current season winds down. By the way, I mean, we've got a 1-1 series now in my Minnesota Spurs series. I was excited. They barely pulled out game 1 against the Spurs, but I was very excited that they were able to do that. Are you going to change your prediction about the Spurs Timberwolves series now that you've seen 2 games?
So, of course, Minnesota makes me look bad game 1, but I don't think I'm going to change my prediction. I don't know that I actually gave a number of games, but look, the Nuggets might have, maybe the Nuggets didn't, but the Nuggets fan base might have taken Minnesota a little bit too lightly when those injuries happened. And I'm not saying that San Antonio did the same thing. But look, they're a team that has been to the Western Conference Finals, 2, maybe 3 seasons in a row, 2 seasons in a row. they are a tough, physical team that's well coached. They finish at the rim. They have shooters. There's no reason why they can't beat the Spurs. I mean, that game one was absolutely crazy to watch with Wemby getting 13 blocks. That's just not something you see in the NBA these days. But the fact that Minnesota, even with Wemby getting 13 blocks, was still able to win that game, I think is a huge testament to that Minnesota team. They, they've got guys, they've got the grit, they've been there, they know how to do it, they know how to win, and maybe I can admit when I'm wrong, and maybe I was part of that Nugget fan base that kind of maybe underestimated the Timberwolves a little bit.
Yeah, man. I mean, fair enough. We'll see how it shakes out. I'm going to stick with my Wolves in 6 prediction. I don't necessarily know if Wolves in 7 is something I would say. Because if it goes back to San Antonio, depending on how the series has gone, I mean, you also factor in that they're a young team. Spurs are still a young team, so maybe Minnesota would win in 7. But I think Minnesota really just has to just win their home games and win in 6 if they're going to win this series. But it'll be a competitive one. Yeah, for sure. I mean, 13 blocks in the game is just crazy. And with a triple-double also, by the way. So, Wembanyama. But, I mean, this just goes to show how challenging it'll be for the Nuggets to compete in this Western Conference over the next few years of Nikola's prime, because you've got these legitimate young superstars in the West. SGA, despite his attempts to flop on every single drive he makes, I mean, they're a legitimate team. They're good. And so if the Nuggets don't make some significant upgrades this season, they're still probably a little bit behind the 8 ball. But, we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it all shakes out. Any other final thoughts before we wrap up today's episode?
One thing real quickly, I know we're heading into Mother's Day weekend. Just want to send a shout out to all the moms out there. All the guys listening, make sure you reach out, touch your mom, give her a phone call, shoot her a text, wish her happy Mother's Day, let her know that you're thinking of her. But other than that, that's about all I have.
Nice. Wonderful shout out to the moms this weekend. Happy Mother's Day weekend. Go do something fun. Go get outside, get some time with your mom in there and the rest of your family. But till next week, we will see y'all. We'll be diving into some player discussions on next week's episode. So you're going to want to come join us for those discussions. Till then, have a fantastic week and we'll see you then. Take care.
Guys.